Well, hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of our Squad Up series. Now, what this series is about is community. About a good community and how we strive to be the kind of people that create and build healthy communities. And so what we are looking at throughout this entire series is the book of Ephesians in the Bible, because Paul, one of Jesus's disciples, writes so much about things that we can apply to what it looks like to build good community. And last week we talked about how we are all invited into God's family. And that's a significant and an important community that we have. And each and every one of us are participating in communities like that, like in our small groups. But now I want to talk about a value that we should have within our communities, especially within our communities centered around God. And that's the value of reconciliation. And I think the value of reconciliation is so desperately needed right now. There's so much anger, pain, hate in our world, in our country, with everything going on. And it can seem so unbelievably daunting. But there's always something we can do. We are never hopeless. And the first thing we can do is look at ourselves and look at the communities we have and ask, how can we build better communities that help us strive towards a better tomorrow? And so that's why I think reconciliation is important. Because you see, the practice of reconciliation is the practice of coming together, of healing, of tearing down walls and building bridges. But it's not easy. You see, we all have relationships in our lives that are difficult. Whether it's one person or it's a group of people or it's a system we've experienced, there's something in our lives that's extremely difficult that is hard for us to feel safe around, hard for us to engage with. You see, growing up, my sister and I had a very intense relationship. She and I are both very opinionated, confident, outspoken people, but rarely did we have the same views or values on things. And we would butt heads all the time. Now, when we were younger, these fights were ridiculous and mundane about artichokes or who wore whose clothing, things like that. But as we got older, these fights started to get more and more hostile, and they were about things we actually cared about, like who we thought we were as people or what we valued and thought was important. But the thing is, she and I didn't know how to reconcile. Our fights were big, and our fights were mean, and they were nasty. And I remember the worst fight we ever had was when we were in college, and we didn't speak to each other for 3 months after that. You see, we were so insistent, both she and I, on being right. On being right and the other admitting that they were wrong, that we were not able to even communicate with each other until there was enough time that had passed that we had calmed down enough to hear each other out. But the thing is, that's not what we are called to be like. That's not what we're called to do. And that's something I've really had to learn in my 20s especially. And if this is something you can learn now in your teens, it's going to help you out so much more as you grow up. The power of reconciliation. You see, Paul talks about reconciliation in Ephesians 2. What you need to know is that there was 2 groups of people in the early church, and they did not like each other. And that was the Jews and it was the Gentiles. Now, the Jews were God's Jewish people, his chosen people that were talked about all throughout the Old Testament. And then now in the New Testament, a whole new group of people are invited into God's kingdom, invited into being God's people, and that's the Gentiles. And the Gentiles are everyone else. Everyone. And that caused some hostility, some intensity. They didn't see eye to eye. The way they lived was not the same. The things they valued was not always the same, and they butted heads. And so Paul wrote to them. He wrote to them, challenging them for reconciliation. And I want to read through what he wrote in Ephesians 2, 11 through 18. Here's what it says. Therefore remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands, remember that at that time you were separated from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. There's so much in those verses, but what Paul is saying is that Jesus came to bring peace. Jesus came to reconcile us, not just with him and God, but with each other. And if we are Christians, if we consider ourselves followers of Jesus, then it is our purpose also to seek reconciliation. Now, I want you to understand, seeking reconciliation does not mean you compromise on what is right. It doesn't mean you just agree with someone so that there isn't any fighting. Reconciliation isn't just completely forgoing what matters. No, reconciliation is seeking to sit with someone, hear them out, value them, and figure out how can we move forward even if we might not fully understand each other. And Jesus was the one who reconciled us. And Paul wants to remind us, and he says this in Ephesians 2, verses 8 through 10, the biggest reason we should be reconciled with one another, the biggest thing we need to remember when we are seeking to reconcile, and that's this. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and it is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. You see, what Paul is reminding us and the Jewish and Gentile people back then is that we are all saved by God. We are all saved by Jesus. We cannot save ourselves. None of us are perfect. None of us have all the right answers. None of us have all the truth. And we need to understand that it is Jesus. Jesus is the one who reconciles us, and we should remember that. And when we are seeking to do what is right in this world, when we are seeking to do what is good, we should be seeking to follow the example of him, Jesus. And his example is to love and to seek reconciliation, to tear down walls and build bridges, to fill the divides and figure out how to recognize one another and connect with one another, even if it's difficult, even if it takes time. That's what we should be after, reconciliation. And here's how I look at it when I think of what reconciliation looks like. You see, it talks about how Jesus came and he tore down walls. He tore down what divided us from him. And I think he tore down those walls and he did something new. He created a table. He created a table for each and every one of us to sit at, to sit at, to look each other in the eye, to hear one another, to be heard by one another, to value one another, and to feel valued. Jesus wanted to create a place where we can come together from difference of opinions, a difference of experiences, a difference of understandings, and be willing to hear each other out. Seek what is true and what is right, and hopefully reconcile and pursue what is God-honoring together. And that is what Jesus wants for us. He wants us to be the kind of people that tear down walls. But how do we do that? And that's not always easy. And it's not just a one and done answer. It's something that we have to learn over and over and over again in so many different experiences, what it looks like to reconcile. You see, my sister and I are older now. We're not teenagers. And we have learned to reconcile. And we don't do it perfectly. And we're still figuring it out. But what we have learned is that we finally stopped getting to the point in our fights where we were so angry and so hurt and so just loud and screaming at each other that we didn't even want to see one another anymore or talk to each other. We got to a point where we said, okay, this is enough. And we would hear each other out. Because I think my sister and I started valuing our relationship and honoring that relationship over feeling like we won that argument, over feeling like we were right. And I think the hardest thing that I've had to learn is that in every argument I've ever entered in with my sister, when we finally sat down with one another, heard each other out, heard each other's sides, heard each other's intentions and perspectives, my sister would have things to apologize for, and I would always have things to apologize for too. You see, anger and hatred and misunderstanding are not always these black and white things. They're messy. And in order to sift our way through them, to figure out what's right and what's good in all the mess, we first need to be willing to sit and listen and hear and own what we can own. And what's been interesting in mine and my sister's relationship is our fights are now fewer and farther in between. And nowhere near as bad. Because when we fight now, we understand each other's heart a little bit better, understand each other's intentions, understand what the other values and how we come off to one another. But getting to that point required us to have a lot of conversations. For me to share a lot of hard truths with her and her to share a lot of hard truths with me. But it was worth it, guys. It was worth it to be able to build that bridge and that relationship with her. And we're still building it. And we're going to be building it for the rest of our lives. But I don't want to be the kind of person that just stops there. I want to be the kind of person that's building those kind of relationships with everyone. And I want us to be the kind of community that Paul calls us to be building those kind of relationships, to be the kind of community that seeks to reconcile and understand one another so that we can figure out together how we move forward and do what is right. So in small group today, I want you to be asking yourself, where have you put up walls? Where have you put up walls? It could be with a friend, it could be with a family member, it could be with the system, it could be with people at your school, it could be with a whole friend group. But somewhere in your life, you've put up walls. Where in your life have you put those walls up? And how can you be working on bringing those walls down? And I want you to talk about that with your group. Challenge yourselves and challenge each other on how as individuals are you going to be ones to seek reconciliation, but also then challenge yourselves on how you're going to be a group that seeks reconciliation. Because a good community, a squad worth being a part of is one that seeks to build healthy, long-lasting relationships. And we do that by valuing the power of reconciliation, of valuing the power of restoring relationship instead of throwing it away. Because that's the example that Jesus set for us. So how are we going to run after that example? how are we going to be the ones that tear down walls and build bridges? All right, guys, enjoy small groups. All right, guys, so it's Ronnie and Chip do announcements.
We're back.
Yes, we are. We have 2 announcements for you this week. The first one is...
Oh, we're going to be continuing with our Bible study in the parking lot, 7 to 8 on Wednesday.
Yes, we are.
1st and 2nd Peter.
Yeah, 1st and 2nd Peter. It's some good stuff, guys, and I think it's pretty relevant, so it might be worth coming and listening to.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then our final announcement is if you are a freshman, an incoming freshman, we have a t-shirt for you. It's our gift to you, welcoming you into Impact. And so if you haven't gotten your t-shirt yet, you can email me at vwood@willowcreek.org, or you can have your parents email me and we can organize for you to get your t-shirt. It's a
Is it as nice as this one?
It's way better than that one.
Better than this?
Better than that.
I mean, a lot of thought went into this one.
So much better than that. So
All right, well, maybe.
email me to get your t-shirt. All right, guys, enjoy small groups and have a great day.
Have a good one.
Ronnie and Chip do announcements.
We're out.